simple little instructions if you don't know Teams that well or you haven't used this feature in Teams. I highly recommend for this forum that you pin the two speakers, the two panelists that are going to be presenting. On the left-hand side, you can see how you can pin from the participants list by clicking on the three dots and then clicking pin. And our presenters, I'll introduce them in a few moments and you can go find their names. On the right-hand side is how you would pin from their video. So it should be pretty easy. The panelists are the ones that are sharing their video right now that aren't me. And then if you are joining on mobile, in order to pin someone, you tap and hold on their photo or on their video, and then you get the little white pop-up that shows up, and then you tap on pin in order to pin them. And you can pin multiple people's video so that they're sharing the screen so that you can see them pretty well while they're talking. So with that, want to give a quick little rundown of kind of how today is going to go, since it is a little different than our previous forums. So I'll do quick introductions, then we will have Harvinder. I'm not going to try his last name. I'll let him say that for you so he gets it right and you know it the right way. He will talk about his journey getting certified with IIBA as a CBAP or CBAP, if that's what you call it. And then Dan will share a little bit about his journey getting the PMI-PBA certification. And then we will open it up for you to ask questions. Once we get to the Q&A portion, we will ask that you type your questions into the chat, and then I will read your questions to the panelists and give them each an opportunity to answer, and we'll kind of round robin that way. And then we'll close the meeting, hopefully on time. So let's get rolling. So I'd like to introduce Harvinder. He's a senior consultant at Central One Credit Union and a member of the IIBA Vancouver chapter. He has a lot of experience as a BA implementing new systems and enhancements to existing systems. So I'll leave his bio up there for a minute or so for you to read that. And then go ahead, Harvinder, and take it from here for your intro.
Thank you. I think you've done a great job, Tim, in introducing the speakers. So my last name isn't that difficult. So it's as you can see here. So it's Harvinder Pal Singh. That you can address me as. So Pal Singh is my surname, or maybe Pal is my middle name and Singh is my surname. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining today. Hope you can learn something from all the speakers in this session today, and it would help you in your certification journey. So I'll start with my journey and my personal experience on how I started, how I went ahead and did my certification. So I'll start with my flashback. In 2018, I was in India, doing very well, working for a global bank, which is also second largest Japanese bank, and I was handling their entire IT project portfolio for the India business. I then decided to move to Canada and started ways of finding how I could highlight my experience and expertise as a business analyst in a new market where I would be moving to, so that I can attract employers and get a job and perform well in my my new job. So getting certified as a business analyst was on top of the list of things I needed to do to get into a good position in the new market. So having done my MBA from a premier business school in India, I never felt the need of any professional certification. And again, that's how I thought way back. And I always thought that they would maybe in some way overpower the credentials I already had. But then I had to change my thought process. And then because my business school, my professional organizations that I worked for, and my achievements at work might not be as impressive as they were in India as compared to what people would kind of perceive them in the Canadian market. So I started searching about certifications, and then business analysis was the work that I've been doing all this while. And I had a top of mind recall for PMI and IIBA. So both organizations I knew beforehand, but then the difference was that PMI was always synonymous to PMP and IIBA for CBAP. And I had colleagues who were both PMI, CBAP, but I didn't have anyone who was PBA certified, the PMI-PBA certification, which Dan would talk about. So I didn't get much knowledge on that front. I continued to do more research on which side I should go. And then I went to the IIBA website. I found out, and I was trying to find more Canadian connections so that I could kind of highlight that certification in the right spot. And I thought maybe if it is a Canadian, although IIBA is global in nature, but then if I found out that they are registered in Canada, like the head office is in Canada. So that added one more point for the IIBA certifications. And then upon further research, I found out that the IIBA Vancouver chapter, where I was planning to move to, so they are pretty active in terms of organizing various monthly study group sessions. In terms of, they also had monthly speaker series for business analysts to build their knowledge and provide tools that they can get started from day one in their professional work. So that quite kind of interested me, and I kind of planned that once I land there, I can join the chapter and then maybe attend the study group sessions and prepare as I move ahead. So that's how I made this decision to go ahead with the IIBA certification. And then I found the various levels. I'll talk about them in a bit. There are 3 levels, and then the highest level was what I was eligible for. So I started preparing and finding out how I can prepare for this certification and what all is required. So I registered for an online virtual training session, and I did that. I did a bit of research on the various options available, and I wanted to do it online because I might move and then I'll have the flexibility to attend the sessions. So, and on top of it, I was getting a huge discount for that training. So I went for it and got the CDUs, which are required as a prerequisite for the exam. But I could hardly complete that training and do one round of reading of the material that I had accumulated at that time. And it was time for me to move to Canada. And then I went into a transition phase. And once I moved here, luckily in a few weeks' time, I landed my current job with Central One Credit Union. And that's where I've been working from the beginning. So it's been more than 2 years now. And it happened without my CBAP certification. So I want to highlight one thing here. So although it might be claimed that the certifications will help you land a good job, will help you in your promotions and growth in your career, but that doesn't mean that without a certification, you cannot get a good job or you cannot get a promotion. So definitely it would help, but if you don't have it, so that's not the end of the world. It is something that's good to have. So please don't be discouraged that if you don't have any certifications against your name, that's not a big deal. So what you are and how you're performing, how you're doing as a business analyst, that matters a lot. But then to the external world, I feel that, yeah, certifications are important. Again, that's my personal take, and you would have your own. But again, so that was without the certification, but then the journey did end there. So 1 year into the job, then beginning of 2020, I realized, oh, I have an unfinished job to complete. So then I started kind of gearing up again with the preparation. And coincidentally, the IIBA Vancouver chapter study group sessions, they start from January and they go till November, December. So in January, the study group sessions were starting. And then I thought maybe this is a good opportunity for me to kind of start from scratch again. And on a month-on-month basis, every month they cover one chapter, and throughout the year, the entire content is covered. So I thought I'll attend these sessions and then I'll build up my knowledge and keep on reading and practicing the questions as I move ahead. And then I started doing that, and it was March 2020 and everything shut down. And till that time, we were having face-to-face sessions, and then we moved over to virtual sessions. And then I continued till the end of the year. And as planned, I continued reading the reference materials and practicing questions as I moved ahead. So in terms of the preparation material that I used, so I referred to the BA Book of Knowledge, which is the prescribed content from IIBA, which is also called BABOK. So that's one. And the virtual training that I attended back in India, that was another thing that helped me initially to build the basic concepts. And then after that, I kept on continuing with the study group sessions that added a lot of knowledge. There were discussions happening. And as part of one of the study group sessions, I won the Watermark Learning BABOK Guide, which was kind of awarded as part of the participation that I had with the study group. And then with it also came a 5-day trial of practice questions and sample papers of Watermark Learning, which I used for the final phase of preparation. And then I also downloaded a few ebooks from the IIBA global website, which helped in in my understanding of what sort of questions will come in the exam. So, but again, due to COVID, I could not travel, and same for everyone else for 2020. So I had my 3 weeks of leave, which I had to use, otherwise they would lapse. So I planned that at the end of the year, in the last 3 weeks of December, I will take 3 weeks off from work, and then I would kind of do the final round of preparation. I'll read the BABOK once, I'll practice questions, I'll do mock exams, and then I'll book the exam for end of December and get done with it in 2020. But then I did a blunder mistake. I kind of waited for the fag end to book my exam date and time slot. And then I didn't realize a lot of people were thinking like me, and they were planning to give the exam by end of December. And then I did end up getting a time slot for the exam. And so I eventually booked the exam for 3rd of January, which was like the last day of my 3 weeks of vacation. And then I had to join work on 4th of January after all the fatigue of more than 3 weeks. So that's how the booking process went. And then on 3rd January, I gave the exam. It was all the virtual at my home. So I made sure that I didn't have any disturbance. The internet was continuous and no one else was heavily using the internet at that time. And the CBAP exam is a 3.5 hour long exam. So you really need to practice sitting for that long at one stretch and maintaining your concentration for that long to perform well. So in the real exam, I was much slower than the practice exams, maybe because the actual exam was much tougher than the mock exams that I had practiced, and I could hardly complete the exam in time. But I was happy to see that I passed the exam with a higher proficiency in all the 6 areas, and was delighted that it's finally all over and I'm a CBAP certified now. So that's what my experience was, and we can handle questions later on in how I kind of gathered all the data related to my experience and how did I prepare specifically, and Dan could also talk about it. But at this point, I like to kind of give you a brief on the various, the 3 levels of certifications that IIBA has for business analysis, and I'll request him to share his screen. So there are multiple sources that you can refer. You can go to the IIBA global website, which Tim is sharing right now. And you can also download the BA handbook for the certifications and their requirements, which is a PDF document. And that has all the information related to the various levels of certification. So if Tim, you can, so this talks about what is the process, how do you log into the account. So these are the 3 levels of certification. So the ECBA, CCBA, and CBAP are the 3 levels. So the entry certificate of business analysis is the first level or the basic level for business analysts. who have no experiences in business analysis. So this is for someone who's trying to get into business analysis, or maybe a student who's graduated and then wants to work in the business analysis area. So this is the first level is for someone like that. And the second level is the CCBA, which is the Certificate of Capability in Business Analysis. And for someone who's having 2 to 3 years of experience in business analysis, and has a set of hour requirement in terms of the actual work that you've done on projects. And the highest level that IIBA has is CBAP, the Certified Business Analysis Professional, which is for seasoned professionals who are having more than 5 years of experience in industry. So all these 3 levels have various like professional development R requirement. They have the project work requirement in terms of, say, the ECBA has 0 hours required for any business analysis work, whereas the CCBA requires you to have 3,750 hours of work, business analysis work in the last 7 years. And the CBAP certification requires 7,500 hours in the last 10 years. So based on what your experience level is, you can pick one level and then go ahead with it. And there are other requirements as well in terms of the knowledge area specific hours. And again, just a caveat here. So it talks about business analysis, but the entire content and the knowledge areas within business analysis world might not be hardcore business analysis. So there are knowledge areas that talk about strategy analysis, that talk about kind of evaluation of solutions. So those might not be hardcore BA work. So if your title is not business analyst, or you're not doing business analyst work, so it doesn't mean that you cannot have hours against those knowledge areas. So it has to align with the knowledge areas that IIBA has prescribed, although your title might not be a pure play business analyst. So these are the various levels, and then you have the R requirement I've talked about, and then there's the entire application submission process and cost involved at various levels. So you have a membership fee for IIBA as a global entity, and then you have an application fee, and then you have an exam fee. So you can refer to the exam fee section on the IIBA website, and you can get more details. And for the highest levels of exams, specifically the CBAP and the CCBA, you are also required to give professional references. So you're required to give 2 references. So that's another requirement. And like any professional certification exam and then a credential, so there is a possibility that your application can get audited. So you should be prepared for it. Everything that you enter there should be kind of true, and you have to sign an undertaking as well as part of the application process. So that's pretty much it. And once you submit, you are eligible to book your date and sit for the exam. And they still have the actual center-driven exam, but you also have an option to give the exam at your home using your personal equipments and laptops. So I think that's at a high level what the certification levels that IIBA has and the requirements for these 3 levels. I'll now hand it over back to Tim, and then, yep, Tim, you can go ahead now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Harvinder. So with that, we'll let Dan talk about his journey, and then we'll open up for questions after that. I see we've already got one in the chat. Don't worry, I won't lose your question. I will read it once we get to that point. Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, yeah, great to be with everyone today. My name is Dan BUDZKO. I'm currently the Director of Enterprise Risk Management at Selco, and we're about a 2.4 billion credit union headquartered here in Eugene. My background a little bit includes some time in the military as an intelligence analyst, is where I started. I had a couple roles growing up in information technology in Columbia, Maryland, and here in Eugene. I spent some time with an information security controls testing firm, where I function as a controls auditor and an operations manager and project manager. And I did that for about 4 years. I've been with Selco since 2012. I started an internal audit, and I promoted into my current role, managing what we call the risk oversight department. And I've been working on a lot of work, just kind of transforming the mission and mandate for this function. So I'm really focused on developing our ERM capabilities at the moment. So my profile includes a bit of a mix of government, private sector, and now a not-for-profit organization. So I've appreciated these perspectives. It's kind of informed my thinking as I've gone along in my career. Education-wise, I have a BS in information technology, and I'm currently working on an MBA. And I do hold a number of professional certifications. I have a couple from ISC2, so I'm a CISSP with management concentration. I'm also certified in cloud security. I have a couple from ISACA, so I'm certified in information systems auditing and risk and information systems control. And I hold one from the IAPP in information privacy, from the Disaster Recovery Institute in business continuity planning, and 2 from PMI as a project manager, a PMP, and now a business analyst. And also hold a couple from CompTIA and networking and security. So my background is a bit of a mix of information technology, information security program management, controls auditing, audit, project management, business analysis, and now enterprise risk management. My journey into the business analysis world is, sort of what compelled me to certify. I first of all, I'm one of those individuals that considers themselves a bit of a lifelong continuous learner. I'm very much a proponent of, constantly reinventing yourself, pushing your boundaries a little bit, getting outside your comfort zone, learning new things. And so even today kind of qualifies as something that's a little bit outside my comfort zone, but those are the things I like to do. And I appreciate certification exams mainly because as I learn new things, I like to be able to prove to myself that I understand what I've read and I can apply what I've learned. So I kind of do this pretty frequently. It's been doing this for about probably 15 years now. So. And I do believe in certifications. I've grown a lot as a professional from going through the certification process. I think the experience you get and the rigor that it takes to kind of see it through is just valuable. I've always encouraged the people that I have managed to pursue certifications. And as a manager, I've always ensured that they had the time and the funding to pursue that. So, and I've seen those individuals grow a lot as a result of that. So I am a big fan of it. But generally, my journey into business analysis really stemmed from my work in conceiving a model for ERM, ironically. I've been intrigued for a while now how risk analysis and business analysis roles, I think, can work pretty synergistically to drive an organization's performance. So as I've sought to formulate an ERM model for my organizations and thinking about how these roles intersect, and I think, risk analysts, business analysts, project managers, those types of roles, part of my motivation for learning and certifying in something like business analysis is to really be able to substantively understand and have dialogue with BA practitioners and understand their goals and thought processes. And as PMI touts, the PMI-PBA really is one of their fastest growing certifications. And I'm really not surprised by that. I felt for a while that, even though I didn't really hold the title, just thinking like a business analyst in what you're doing in your activities, I think just leads to better outcomes. So I've always been a fan of the discipline, even from my risk analyst role. And even in my organization, it's not so much the case anymore, but, for a time we had roles kind of blended where, a lot of the time the project manager was working with the BA hat on. They were, trying to identify product requirements and And that's kind of moved off now to our, a formal BA function we have. But for a while, there wasn't really enough, I don't think enough differentiation between, what was the product and what was the project, and who owned these different responsibilities. And I've said, a lot of times in my career doing risk assessment, just, how great would it be to have a BA in the room when you're doing risk assessment, looking and listening for things on about how to improve, or maybe problems to be solved. And arguably, if I define risk as, the risk to optimize performance for the organization, in a lot of ways, the RA and the BA, we're kind of looking and listening for the same things. We're looking for those things for either opportunities to improve, or, remove barriers or problems that's maybe leading to impaired performance. So I've just discovered in my business analysis journey that I think risk assessment, it may not be, the only means, but it's a key means of identifying problems and opportunities, which I think inform the needs assessment process, which is the first domain of the exam content outline for the PMI-PBA. It's arguably the step, I think, that precedes define business need, because before you can define it, you have to know about it. So I think, as something I've learned in my journey is that I think, as a risk assessment can be conducted, I think that those problems and opportunities can be identified, which the BA can then perform that needs assessment. They can, calculate the value proposition, construct the business case, champion the approval, and which leads to the project charter, which is owned by the project manager. So I see those roles always working synergistically as I've thought about enterprise risk management. And so that kind of led me to want to study business analysis more, and then ultimately certify, and largely to just give myself a better understanding of the discipline of business analysis, and just give myself more of a solid footing of my interactions with BA practitioners and just understanding the work. So why did I choose PMI over the IIBA? So largely probably two reasons. Number one, I had familiarity with PMI already. So I certified as a PMP in 2015, and that was, that was a very rigorous process, and I was anticipating something similar with the PBA. But the other reason that led me to the PMI route is I really appreciate the materials that they publish around how to position these roles within a larger framework, or a larger, more holistic construct. So for those of you that are familiar with PMI, they really have a number of certifications around portfolio management, subsidiary portfolios, programs, projects, and then ongoing operations, and how these roles work together within that construct to fulfill the mission and ultimately achieve the vision of the organization. So that framework and that construct that PMI offers was very informative to me as I was thinking about ERM, and just how risk management really transcends from the vision all the way down to operations. So how do I, as the risk analyst, build a coherent system to assess risk, to identify those things that may impair, fulfilling the organization's mission. So I do have a little bit of a, maybe a little different perspective on, going into the exam, because I don't hold the title of BA, and arguably didn't have a lot of, maybe formal education or mastery of formal BA terminology, or even thinking going into the exam. So I look at it a little bit as a rookie going into it. So I offer that here, because for those of you that can, are thinking about, pursuing a certification, even though I have a lot of certification experience, this was an area that I had to really kind of dial in and master in what proved to be a fairly short amount of time for me in pursuing an exam like this. So, but overall, I think the experience that I've talked about here enabled me to satisfy the requirements for the BA certification in terms of the experience and the number of hours performing the BA work. So Tim, I don't know if you want to throw up there the what those elements are, but I'll just describe those things briefly. So as far as experience and the education requirements for the PMI-PBA, they do talk about the first level. It's a little bit different from what Harvinder was talking about, how they have sort of 3 levels to achieve within that certification. The PMI just has the one business analysis certification, and you know, how many hours you need and the education you need to qualify falls into kind of 3 categories. So the first one is, you know, if you're in the category of having either a high school diploma or an associate's degree, you are required to have at least 7,500 hours or greater than or equal to 60 months in the last 8 years working as a BA practitioner, as well as having 35 contact hours earned on the topic of business analysis. So for me, and I think we'll probably talk about this throughout today's session, and I think maybe Harvinder might have alluded to this. I did the Watermark boot camp for the PMI-PBA, so I was able to achieve those 35 hours through that. The second category is if you have a bachelor's degree or higher, that the number of hours drops to 4,500 hours or greater than or equal to 36 months in the last 8 years working as a BA practitioner. And then again, having that 35 contact hours earned on the topic of BA practices. And those hours do need to be achieved prior to actually applying for taking the PMI-PBA exam. And then finally, if you have a bachelor's or a postgraduate degree from what's called a GAC accredited program, which is a school that offers, it's an accrediting body for like project management and related degrees. If you have a degree through one of those, they drop that minimum experience down to 2 years or 24 months of kind of unique, non-overlapping BA experience. And I believe that they waive the 35 hours needed for education. So that's the way the PMI structures the eligibility for the certification. And so as you think about pursuing that, you know, PMI's website has outlined all of this within their exam content outline and their PMI certification handbook. But as far as like, you know, sort of what's next for me, I'm going to be continuing to develop an ERM program and using a lot of what I learned to inform how these roles and responsibilities kind of work together. I'm going to be, you know, as far as continuous learning, which I like to do, I am interested also in the subject of decision and data analytics, how analytics can support decisions and how the value proposition on some of these things that are uncovered by the organization. So there's a CAP designation out there that I see is also offered in the context of business analysis, and I'm also working on a little bit around financial risk management. But largely, what I intend to do is really learn from all of you as well, from a risk perspective, and continue to interact here in this forum going forward. And I will say that you know, I know we'll probably get into some more nuance here during the question and answer session, but if there are those that are out there that would like to connect offline, if something doesn't get answered today, I'm more than happy to connect with people outside of the session if you'd like to, you know, do a further drill down into my experience or, you know, maybe the exam itself. So so that's a bit of my intro here, Tim. I'll toss that back to you.
All right, thank you, Dan. Thank you both again for talking us through your journey of certification and why you chose to go down that route and so forth. And I will jump straight to the questions because we're already past 3:30 and looks like we're going to have some questions flowing in pretty well. So the one question we've already got, and I'll just read it verbatim. One of the things I felt was most difficult when applying for my CBAP exam was the requirement to show my experience for each knowledge area. The specific number of hours and projects required a significant amount of time to track down and document. Do you have any suggestions for how to tackle that? I'm also struggling with the recertification requirements. Any hints for those? So I guess, Harvinder, you want to take a shot at answering that first, and
Yeah,
then
I
Dan, maybe you can answer from the perspective of what you had to go through for the PMI-PBA.
Right. I agree. The collation of data for all your experience and putting it down in the website for your application is a very cumbersome task. So I took weeks to do that. And how I did it was like I had 2 sample templates which were not matching with each other, and it did match with the website itself. So what I did was I clubbed all those, the 2 templates and the data that's required on the website to create a uniform template. So it was a one-to-one mapping of the template, an Excel template that I had with the fields that are required to be input in the application on the website. So I started off with my resume, and I started off with the most recent work experience and project I was doing, because then that's the freshest you would have, and you would be able to kind of enter all those details, and that it'll take an increasing amount of time for you to kind of recall what you did 5 years back in your previous organization. And then you would start and keep on jotting down each of the R's. And specifically for CBAP, I'm not sure. For PMI, I don't think it's very difficult to align the R's. But for CBAP, you need to align the R's with the specific knowledge area. And each of the knowledge areas have their own minimum R allocation and eligibility criteria. So you need to make sure that you have 900 R's in 4 out of the 6 knowledge areas. So you need to keep a track of those knowledge area wise R's as well, apart from the overall hours. So it's important to do that in an organized way, and that's why an Excel template does help a lot. So you would jot down all your projects and move down further into your historical projects and organizations, and you would enter all the details so that you can just copy and paste these details into the website once you're done, and you know that you've met all the eligibility criteria and the final total aggregated hours of experience. So that's one thing. So don't start directly in the website. So you work everything out on an Excel so that you can change things, you can add new projects. So if you're not you've skipped a couple of projects in your current organization, but then now you don't fulfill the hour requirement, so you can add those projects as well. So it is much cumbersome to do that in the website. So it's much more easier in Excel. And then in one sitting, you copy all that data into your application and then just go ahead and submit the application for approval. So I think that's a tip from my side. And again, you'll have to do a lot of introspection, a lot of thinking, and a lot of calculations and recalling stuff on what you did for each of the projects. Definitely, it will take a lot of time, and you have to be prepared for it. You set out, say, 2-3 hours on a weekend or late night to work on that with full concentration so that you can get it done in a few days' time. Yeah, Dan, you have anything to add on to it?
Yeah, I would say I didn't find the process with PMI in this regard too painful, frankly. I will say that Watermark does have an application worksheet that you can download to sort of guide your documentation of your journey. I did not use that. I created a document and I did organize it by project, and I put the number of months that the project went, but I really endeavored to frame it by the domains of the exam content outline. So I did a narrative style in my summary of my experience with this. And frankly, I tend to be a little bit of a wordy guy. And the first time I sort of wrote my narrative on this, I was sharing that with my instructor with Watermark, and he's like, Dan, you got to dial this thing back a little bit. You got to shorten this. So I really just tried to be very direct and succinct, and I tied the substance of the narrative to the domains of the exam content outline. So when it comes to like whether it's needs assessment, so what was the business problem? You know, what was the opportunity? What was the value proposition? Who were the stakeholders? How did we go about eliciting and organizing requirements? You know, how did we define value? How were we going to ensure there was value from the solution? So I wrote a very pretty short narrative touching on those sort of points and just offered to, you know, you got to supply a reference to, you know, that PMI can contact to verify that. But that was what I did. I did not. They say the audits for these things are random. I did not get audited, but that was the sort of the instruction I got from a PMI perspective, is just be pretty short and succinct, very direct, tie it to the domains of that exam content outline, and it worked for me.
Right. I think that's a great suggestion, Dan. And I'd like to add to it. So I was down 3-4 projects with all the data put into the Excel template, and then I realized, let me test it out in the platform. So I went ahead and put all the details in for one of the projects. And like Dan, I was also verbose. And then I realized the description, the project description had a word limit. So all my projects had exceeded the word limit. So I had to cut that short. And then for the remaining projects, I made sure that I had a validation within Excel that prompted me if I've exceeded the word limit for that section, for that field. So that helped me kind of staying within the word limit and making sure I don't have to redo all my writing in order to fit in the word limit. So that's an important thing you should take note of while filling your application. Thanks, Dan, for bringing that up.
Yeah, and the PMI does have it's pretty user-friendly, simple application that you log into, and it just has the drop down, so it'll calculate the number of months on something. So it's
right.
I found the process pretty easy.
All right, thank you both. That was good insight. Next question. This one's probably a little bit more directed at Harvinder. I've considered adding the PMI-PBA certification to my CBAP because I work very closely with PMI certified project managers and found it took quite a bit of time for us to negotiate our tasks to ensure we were working most effectively. Studying the PMI-PBA documentation really helped with that. So Harvinder, have you had any problems aligning IIBA and PMI expectations?
Right. I think there is a bit of disconnect with IIBA because they don't have a corresponding project manager certification and content around it. So whereas PMI has this edge in terms of they have PMP, which is well established, and they have set standards. And then, as Dan mentioned, so the PBA is also kind of closely coupled to the PMI concept, the PMP concepts, and the project manager role. Whereas IIBA is more siloed in terms of it talks very less about what a project manager does on the initiatives. So in fact, it doesn't use the word project itself all throughout the content. It uses initiatives and like changes. These are the sort of words that IIBA uses in the content. So it doesn't directly relate to the project management professional certification and the content. So in real life, if you're working with project managers who are following PMI and you are CBAP certified, so you should expect that there would be conflicts and there would be some gaps of understanding that you would not have. So the CBAP exam doesn't talk about a project charter. It doesn't talk about a project plan. So it is solely only talks about business analysis area of work. And it does have project manager as a stakeholder, but the kind of work that the project manager does is just a few paragraphs and not more than that. So you would have a challenge in terms of interfacing with project managers. But again, as an add-on to your certification, you can build up concepts around project manager roles and what you're expected to do. Luckily for me, for almost all the projects, I've been the project manager as well as the business analysis. So I didn't personally face that challenge of someone talking in a different language than mine. So, but definitely that's a gap. But then it can be filled by adding on your knowledge on what the PMP framework is, what that area talks about, and the various documents that you need to work on. But again, if you're kind of only concentrating on the business analysis area, so then it shouldn't be a major issue. Dan, your thoughts on this?
The only thing that kind of comes to mind for me on this, from a PMP perspective is, bridging that gap. To me, if I'm understanding the question, is just how a PMP or a project manager would be inserting the work that the business analyst does into its work breakdown structure and being able to schedule that out accordingly. So I think if a business analyst is looking at constructing what BA activities they're going to be performing as part of a project, that could be, that scope of work could be inserted into that work breakdown structure, and the project manager can then build the schedule out accordingly. So that's what comes to mind for me as far as a link, or maybe potentially how to overcome any challenge between an IIBA certified business analyst and how a PMP or project manager might be approaching the execution of a scope of work would be into that work breakdown structure.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Sorry, Tim, one more point.
No, go ahead.
So this is, Joanne, this is one aspect of it. So a business analyst interfacing with a project manager, but then now there is Agile and there are other frameworks, there's Kanban. So this sort of a challenge will also come with stakeholders who are following those methodologies. So it's a never-ending story. So you would, again, ultimately have to bridge that gap by building your knowledge on those areas as well. And that, as Dan mentioned earlier, so it's part of the continuous learning process that you still have to take place. You'd have to go through it.
Absolutely. So I've got one more question already in the chat for us, and this one's for both of you. The question is, what would you do differently in terms of your approach to studying for your exam?
I could start. I'll just have to add the caveat that I went into the exam a bit of an experienced test taker now. So I have a distinct sort of methodology that I do now. I have a distinct approach that I take. I'm usually in the book. I give myself a pretty long runway in terms of mastering content through either reading the PMI guide in this case, or the practitioner's guide. And I did it a little bit different this time, because normally I will spend a lot of time mastering the content, and then I'll go to a boot camp to really hone in on weak areas. And then I'll schedule the exam shortly after that boot camp. But this time I did it a little bit out of order. I did a little bit of reading, and I scheduled the boot camp kind of right away. And then really from start to finish, I did the boot camp in December of 2020 for about 4 days there, and I tested at the end of January. So it was really about a month and a half. And I don't normally do it like that. I chose to do it this time, but largely, for me, I would focus on the book, learning the material. For the PMI exam, I really focused on scenarios and tools. They really drill into you knowing which tool to use for different scenarios. Why, if you're going to be doing root cause analysis, knowing the tools that enable you to do that. So I'm not sure for me, I don't know that there was anything different. Maybe I wouldn't have shrunk the timeline so much, but I was successful, and I think the boot camp that I did through Watermark was extremely valuable, and their practice question engine was probably the best I've had in my certification journey. Those questions were very difficult, and they were very really matched what you would see on the exam in terms of the level of difficulty. So Yeah, I don't know if that's very helpful for me. It was, I'm kind of experienced at it now, so I kind of know my path to this. But I would just say, just make sure you give yourself enough of a runway to get really command of the material. Schedule that, maybe that boot camp close to when you think you're going to test, and then that should be a recipe for success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, like it was a while after which I gave the CBAP exams. So the last exam I gave was way back in 2011 or 12, and that was my certified Scrum Master. So, but then as my other like academic exams, so my preparation style is a little different. So I would start with a basic understanding of the concepts. So that's where my initial live virtual classes helped in building the base concepts. And then I like to study on my own pace through the entire material. And in this case, it was the BABOK to start with. So chapter by chapter, I will build the concepts and reinforce what I had, the base I had built as part of the virtual class earlier. And then I would reinforce it by practice questions as I move chapter by chapter. And then I keep on relating concepts between chapters and inputs and outputs like the BABOK talks about, and the various interfaces between each of the knowledge areas. And then between this, I had the study group sessions, which helped a lot in terms of discussions that were happening with other participants and other people who were preparing for the exam. And then in every study group session, so we practice from watermark, we practice questions from watermarks online portal itself. And so this is as I move ahead. But then once I feel that I've reached a comfortable stage in terms of the conceptual understanding, and then now it's time to go for the final phase of learning or preparation so that I can give the exam, that's when I want to get into the hardcore learning or hardcore stuff, which is preparing for the final exam. And this is the time where I will focus on memorization. And so the target at that stage is that I will focus on and reach a point where my conceptual understanding amalgamizes with the memorization that I've done, and vice versa. And the vice versa is important and significant here because for concepts that do not fit well as per your professional experience. So the BABOK has a lot of areas, and a lot of questions will come in exam wherein your professional experience might be very different from what the course material talks about. So that's where your memorization will help, because you've memorized something, then you have to trace it back and build a conceptual understanding around it, and maybe build an imaginary scenario that would help you build that concept. So it's conceptual understanding backed by memorization, and memorization backed by conceptual understanding. So this helped me build the final confidence in the final phases of preparation, where I'll go through the entire material again, I'll practice questions, I'll do mock tests, and I also used watermark mock exams, and they are pretty good. Just one drawback, they focus a lot on memorization. So there were questions which were quite direct. Maybe the lower levels have such questions, but the CBAP is totally scenario and case-based. So you'll have 1 or 2 page cases, and then you will have 3-4 questions around that, or there would be a half-page, 1-page scenario, and there'll be 1 question after that. So memorization doesn't help there, but then for me personally, it helped me build that confidence and reach a stage where I could decide, okay, I've reached a preparation stage, and that is sufficient, and I like certainty. So if I'm feeling confident that yes, I've reached a preparation stage wherein I can 100% clear the exam, so that's when I would go ahead and schedule the exam. And one more preparation tip that I used during the final 3 weeks was that I built the entire content on small sticky notes, like highlights of each knowledge areas and each task within that knowledge area. And I put it on the wall, like just in front of me, where I used to work every day and study every day. And then I used to make it a habit that before every mock exam, I will go through all those 6 knowledge areas and all the elements and tasks within those knowledge areas just before the exam. And it took me like close to 45 minutes to 60 minutes to go through all of them. And then I used to give the exam. And that's what I did for the actual exam before removing all those post-its to make everything clear within the room. So that's another thing that helped me. And I had all my the mnemonics written on each of those post-its in the specific area. So I had a mind map created of the entire content in front of me. So it's more of visual learning that would assist you in answering questions, because you would know, okay, it was in knowledge area 6, and that's the element that is being talked about, and this is what I need to take into consideration for answering a question. So I think that also helped a lot. So it's sort of notes, but you can refer them easily, and they are short encrypted.
Yeah, I might just add, I think sometimes what I've seen, some people approach these and, there's really a focus on, practice questions and just doing practice questions. And really, I have found in my time that I spend the bulk of my time just mastering the content and really staying in the book and learning and memorizing these tools and how to use them and this and that. And I only use practice questions towards the end to start to identify weak areas. It's not sort of my primary way of studying or learning. It's just to help me identify weak areas. So, and I will add, on the PMI side of thing, one, I guess I could call it a disconnect for me was, in the PMI Guide to Business Analysis, for those of you that are familiar with PMI or even certified as a PMP, when I certified as a PMP, I really spent a lot of time memorizing knowledge areas and process groups and processes and memorizing the sequence of all those processes. I really didn't do that here with the PBA, and they have something similar in their guide where they outline the knowledge areas and the process groups. But the way that they structure that in the PMI Guide to Business Analysis is different than the actual exam content outline for the PMI. If you look at the exam content outline, there's 5 domains and there's a set of processes underneath those domains, and that's really where to spend your time studying, not what's in that PMI Guide to Business Analysis. And arguably, I would not have known that had I not taken the Watermark Learning Bootcamp. So I thought that was important to point out. I did not spend any time in that guide memorizing those processes and the sequence of them. It was spent in the exam content outline and those domains and those processes and sequencing those. So I think Harvinder alluded to it. They tell you that, at least I was told in Watermark, don't spend your time memorizing. It's really about understanding concepts, and I don't disagree with that. But I at some point memorization is necessary, and you have to know definitions of what a use case is and what a user story is, and you'll get tested on that. So I find that there's no real substitute than just a lot of times cold memorization of this material. And if you do that, use practice questions to kind of identify those weak areas, and then you'll be, on your way to passing that exam.
Awesome. Thank you both. The next question actually ties in really nicely to where you both went with that. And it's for both of you, of course. Although it was addressed to Harvinder, I think you can both probably address it. It says, you mentioned that the actual exam was much tougher than the mock exams available through Watermark and your study group. What is it that made the real exam tougher?
Yeah, so I wanted to add that to the previous question, but I held on to it. Good. So I'll take it now. So the memorization, as Dan also mentioned, so it does help. And personally, for me, it builds my confidence so I can reach a stage where I can decide that I'm ready for the exam. And the reality is it did help in the exam. So Watermark makes you feel that you need to memorize. There are questions which are verbatim from Babok, so which you would not be able to answer when you have the strongest of conceptual understanding. And there are questions which are like, which of these is not a good solution. And again, these are some of the things that tie back to theory and make you realize that, okay, I didn't have the list of stakeholders for this knowledge area memorized. So what if this question comes in the exam? And then you go back and then memorize all that stuff. But again, it has, if it is backed by conceptual understanding, it is good. But if it is just plain memorization, it doesn't help anything. But in the real exam, none of the memorization helped me apart from the confidence and the conceptual understanding. There was no question like the ones which were there in watermark, which says that which of these is not a stakeholder. So there was no not questions. There were no questions wherein there was a list of stakeholders or a list of tasks and elements, and I could pick easily that, okay, based on my memorization, so this is not, this is not, this is not, and this is the correct answer. So all of them were things that were part of that set of the list of things. So you could not exclude. So your memorization failed there. Say if for a particular task, there are 7 stakeholders and you have 5 or 4 of them in the options for the answer, and all 4 of them are from the 7. Are you able to understand? So there's nothing you can exclude, right? So there, your conceptual understanding will have to help you. So that's one thing that made the actual exam tougher, because the watermark made me think that, yeah, I needed to memorize, and if I get such questions, so I will be able to easily answer them. So all those questions went away. So those were replaced by scenario and case-based questions, which are generally tougher. And then the tougher thing about those scenario and case-based question is that, one, they are time-consuming. You have to read the entire case, and watermark generally doesn't have like 1.5, 2-page cases, whereas the real exam will have, because for sample papers and sample exams, it's always difficult to create such questions. But PMI and IIBA, they have the resources to create such questions. So that's another thing. So although Dan mentioned that the questions in watermark are closer, to some extent for the CBAP exam, they are closer, but not an exact replica. So the actual exam is much tougher. So the benchmark that I had for myself was 70–80% in the exams, with the assumption that the actual exam would be, the cutoffs would be much lesser, and I might be able to perform better. So in a way, I should be able to clear. So the other things, so apart from the lengthiness of the questions, the difficulty level of the options and the confusing options, and no simple questions. On top of it, there were some questions which had nothing to do with backlog, which had nothing to do with anything related to business analysis. There were questions which talked about throughput and effort estimation and other things that I had no clue how to address those. So I had simply no choice but to attempt any answer for those questions. So those questions ate up my time, and I don't know whether I ended up answering them correctly or not, but I'm assuming I did well, because I was at a higher proficiency for all the knowledge areas. But then all of this ate up a lot of time, and I lost my nerves at some point in the beginning, when in 1 hour, based on the mock exams, I could do, say, 40 questions, but in the actual exam, in the same time frame, I could do only half of the questions. And according to my strategy, I had started from simpler questions. So that's the story that I had. Maybe Dan, you have any other perspective?
One disconnect for me in the watermark learning was watermark seemed to really hammer the idea of tailoring business analysis activities according to the project life cycle. So you really went into that exam preparing for questions around change control, how that is different in a agile project versus predictive, or a lot of questions around how those things differ. And I think in the actual exam, I have to say I don't recall really a lot of questions that I seem to recall a handful maybe that alluded to an agile project. But for the most part, you kind of assume that it's a predictive project life cycle that you're dealing with. So that was a little bit of a disconnect for me. The questions in the test engine really tested you on whether you knew how to tailor BA activities according to the project life cycle. And the exam was, I found it to be quite different than what that test engine offered in that regard. But generally, PMI, those questions, there was a lot of extraneous information in the question. You have to really filter through and maybe read the last sentence first to see what they're actually asking for. But they do, as far as PMI goes, they do offer, there's like 4 categories of questions that they will have. I mean, just plain definitions like knowing the definition of a use case diagram, or it could be a sequence question. So knowing you can't allocate requirements until they're approved requirements. So knowing that sequence of those tasks. Scenarios, a lot of scenarios, and being able to understand, a scenario could be, stakeholders are geographically spread out and they're not coming to a consensus on requirements. What would you do? So looking at those answers, you might say, well, I might hold a requirements workshop or something. And ironically, I think one question that comes to mind actually alluded to a payroll project. So I know there was a Seinfeld fan that wrote that question, but the other exam category was like a list of lists. So they might say, which group of tools would you use to document business processes? So they might have, flow charts and process maps and activity diagrams. So PMI has that kind of broken into those 4 types of exam questions, and yeah, that's kind of how I saw it from the PMI perspective.
Good, thank you. Got a couple more questions in there, and I'm actually going to take them out of order because I feel like one of them's more in line with what we're talking about now and should lend itself to a pretty quick answer. I totally agree about losing your nerve in the CBAP exam. The same thing happened to me. I had to stop and sit and just write down knowledge areas and tasks to resettle my mind. If you found yourself losing your focus, how did you bring yourself back to the moment?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So one thing is that you still need to stay positive. You prepared all this while, not for losing your nerve in the actual exam. Because then if you have the conceptual understanding, you memorized stuff, you've kind of done all your mock exams, you've gone through the material and everything. So there's hardly anything that can go wrong in the exam, unless until you set yourself for failure and you kind of let your nerves take over you. So one thing that you can stay positive, you think that, okay, maybe these are the tough ones that you've addressed and the simpler ones are yet to come. Because I started with like scenario-based questions and not the larger 2-page cases, and then which had 4 or 5 questions. So I was expecting that maybe I will save some time on those. And I actually did, because then I don't think the exam is designed in a way that all questions would be tough. Definitely there would be varying levels of difficulty within the exam. And then it's your approach and your luck on the questions that you get first. So specifically in the CBAP exam, so based on the reading and the people I've talked to, so the strategy that also works for me is like I start with simpler questions or less wordy questions, and then as I build my comfort level and I keep on answering questions, I am building my confidence, I go and address tougher questions later on. And that also saves some time at the end to tackle tougher questions with more time. And or on the other hand, if there's not much time left, so what you're leaving are the tougher questions or the wordy questions that would have eaten up your time in the beginning. So you attempted major chunk of your exam and left the remaining one, which maybe you would not have got time to get to anyways. So stay positive, kind of continue your work, you review the questions, and then if you're getting stuck and you're seeing that, okay, so this isn't working out, so that's fine. You change your approach. Maybe you you'd start dealing with the wordy questions because they might be simpler rather than sticking to your approach unless until you're dead sure that it will work for you, because then anything can go wrong in the exam. You will still need to change your approach. And for me specifically, something that hampered my concentration to the exam during the exam was like my exam was stopped 3 times by the person who was monitoring. So once I opened the calculator, which was with inbuilt in the tool itself, and then he stopped the exam saying that I've opened a calculator from my system, which wasn't the case. So I clarified, then my exam got started again. And maybe due to some internet outages or some blips, so my connectivity stopped, and then the exam got restarted. Luckily, I didn't have to attempt all the questions again, but then there was a disruption. So all these things will happen, and I think they should happen. Otherwise, they don't. The exam would have no fun. So they will happen, and you should be prepared for them. I would say that's the reason you do all the mock exams, that you're prepared for it. So and then keep a glass of water next to you. So have a sip, take a few seconds break, and bring back your positivity, and then attempt the next question.
Yeah, I got thrown for a loop too in mine. For the PMP, my typical test taking strategy is to, 1 through 200 and answer and mark questions, and then go back and just, do I like that answer? But this time the PBA was different, and I wasn't expecting it at all. The exam was broken into 2 parts, and you went question 1 through 87 for why I don't know, but it stopped at 87. And if you were to go forward into question 88, you were not going to be able to go back to question 1 through 87. So I had to change my strategy on the fly. I had to go to question 87, then go back and review my 1 through 87, make sure I was good, and then flip to 88 and go through 200, and then, repeat that cycle. But I guess I would probably echo a lot of what Harvinder was saying. For me, I make sure I get a good night's sleep, breathe and relax. And the thing is like, believe in yourself, like Harvinder was saying, like you've put in the time to prepare for it, and the material. Just pause to give your mind a chance to work and process, and maybe start with some of those easier questions to get your confidence, and then go back and start tackling some of those harder ones. But that I personally use it as an opportunity to prove what I know. And I know I put in the time, and this is just an opportunity to demonstrate to yourself and to others that the material, and don't panic, and just relax and breathe, and you'll get it.
Awesome, thank you. And I think we'll probably close off the Q&A with this last question. It is, what are some of the benefits or outcomes of your certification, and what has been the greatest value to you or your organization?
Maybe Dan, I think you can start on this.
Okay. I'm definitely a proponent of certifications. I think there's a long list of benefits. I've grown a lot through the process, the preparation, the rigor of certifying. I think that certifications, I think, lead to increased earnings. It leads to more knowledge. It leads to just that personal and professional growth, keeping your mind sharp. It demonstrates that you have baseline knowledge, experience, and competence in a certain area. And frankly, a lot of roles now, ask for these certifications. And, if I were to pursue something in information security now, I'm not sure I'd even get looked at without, some kind of Security Plus or a CISSP. So I've seen like I said, I've seen other people that I've managed grow a lot from the process of certification. As far as outcomes go, sometimes those benefits aren't immediate, and sometimes it can take a while for, organizations. I think, in a lot of ways, I think organizations may still be catching up to what the value is of these certifications. And I know as a financial institution, we get examined by the state every year. And a lot of times what they will look at is, you know, has the organization hired competent people to manage these, you know, what are very important functions. And certifications are just an upfront demonstration that, you're an individual that understands these things and you're skilled and competent in these things. So I think there's a slew of tangible and intangible benefits to these things, and I highly recommend going through it for your own, just personal and professional growth. And yeah, it leads to a lot of value for yourself and I think your organization.
Right. Yeah, I think Dan has very well said. So it does definitely, a lot of organizations are now having it as a criteria that specifically for provincial jobs here. So they have CBAP as an entry criteria for any business analyst job. So that's one thing I noticed. But then apart from that, obviously your career would develop. And I was promoted recently. Again, it's hard to say if how much a role CBAP had to play with it. But yeah, definitely there was visibility within my organization in terms of getting certified. And there are not many people that are CBAP certified. It's popular, it's getting popular, but then still the number of, if you compare it with the number of people practicing the business analysis professional as compared to the number of people who've been certified, so that's still very less. And if you are someone who's certified, you obviously have an edge if you're applying for an opportunity, although that opportunity might say that, okay, a CBAP or a PBA certification is a good to have or not mandatory, but obviously you will get an edge. For me, on a personal front and outside of the professional world, I've kind of developed a good network within IIBA Vancouver, being part of the study group sessions for 2020. And it's kind of transformed into a situation wherein I've volunteered with them, and now I'm driving their monthly study group sessions and helping other people certify and share my knowledge and how I prepared. So as part of the study group sessions, I share HARVINDER hacks, so which are like techniques or kind of tips that I would need to, I share with the attendees on how to tackle, say, the stakeholders or the techniques for a particular knowledge area. And then that's something I like doing apart from the volunteering and helping people obtain business analysis certifications. Yep.
Great. Thank you both. On behalf of everybody that's been attending today, I'd like to thank you both again for your willingness to speak. Might have been a little bit out of your comfort zones possibly, or not, I don't know. But thank you both for your willingness to share your experience with your certification with all of us and to answer questions without really knowing what people were going to ask. And I encourage you both to check the chat at the end of the meeting and see all of the thank yous that are flowing in there for you. And for all of our attendees, I just want to give a quick shameless plug for our next forum, which will be on June 17th. And we anticipate Kim Kood will be our speaker for that, and she'll be speaking about building strong recommendations as a business analyst. So not sure that'll be her exact title, but that is the topic that we've got her down for. And if you've heard Kim speak before, she speaks at conferences pretty regularly in the PM community. So if you've heard her speak before, you know it's going to be a good event. So hope to see you at the forum in June, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.